Hey, good morning, guys. BAMWX.com meteorologist Michael Clark here with your latest long range forecast here. And I wanted to go over, what we're seeing, the forecast here coming up for the holiday and beyond, as it's been one of those years where there's so many conflicting signals going back and forth on the long range pattern. If you watched my video last week, we talked about that this was probably rushed. It probably wasn't going to get as cold as soon. And that's exactly what's happening right now. We had mentioned more around the second week of January we liked for a time. We still like that. The risk right now is, does it have any legs? And I'm worried that it doesn't. All right. So we're going to start doing these more regularly here. We are doing the subscription here on X, where we're going to do a small monthly fee. I think we're going to do like $3, and we're going to start posting these more frequently. I'm excited to get to know folks on here a little bit better and put some more content out. So without further ado, this is a look here at the Europeans, basically 2-meter temperature anomaly bias over the last 60 forecasts of the model. And you can see that it has a clear and present cold bias across the lower 48. It just continues to forecast things too cold, especially in that 6 to 10 day time frame, hour 144 through hour 240 here. You can just see how it's just too cold in its outlook. And those are things that have to be factored into future outlooks as well. And the reason for this, the reason that this forecast has been biased colder, is because we don't have a tap to the vortex right now. We don't have a tap to the coldest air on the planet. And that's something a lot of folks, again, just aren't really understanding or taking into consideration of these colder maps. These are the forecast high temperatures using a blend of weather models for Christmas Eve. Very, very, very mild. We're talking 15 to 20 degrees above the average temperature for most of the central and eastern U.S. Christmas Day, we're looking at high temperatures in the 50s across the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, upper 50s, Ohio Valley, upper 60s, mid-70s down here across portions of Florida and Texas. You'll be wearing shorts. All right, the 6 to 10 day period using what we call our super clusters. So we break down all the individual clusters of the modeling. We put them into different categories. I'll move this over here real quick just so you can see a little bit better. The 6 to 10 day period is certainly incredibly mild, especially across the northern half in the Northeast here in the 6 to 10. These colder departures start to work in across the South and Southwest. In the 11 to 15 day, you can see that we certainly have a colder pattern than what we've had now. There's no doubt about it. There's no denying it. But still, this is not Arctic air. I mean, it's colder. Yes, it's colder than average. Yes. That's clouds, rains, and storm systems. Some cold air that it is notable for the South and Southeast during this time. But even towards an energy demand perspective here, looking at gas weighted heating degree demands here, it's still nothing impressive. I mean, so can it snow? Is it colder? Sure. But this is not one of these just classic run with it winter patterns that you should just be over the moon about, that you're hearing a lot about on this platform, a lot of the forums. It's just not that. There's just no way around it. I don't know how else to say that. Snowfall potential here. The probability of seeing 3 inches or more of snow the next 2 weeks. You have the American ensemble on the left. You've got the European ensemble on the right. And again, the probability of seeing any really measurable or notable snow here, if you will, is highest across the north central plains and the interior Northeast, really on both model sets. In fact, the coastal Northeast, the South, and a lot of the Midwest here on the European ensemble is not excited whatsoever. Okay. Now, with that said, I think towards the new year in the first week of January, I think we need to watch this area in particular. I think there can be somewhere in here, there can be a pretty big storm system that might bring some snow. Just because it's not bitterly cold doesn't mean it's going to be that you can't get snow. Okay. And again, I'll preface, there's a general agreement here that within the clustering that the Northeast will be at or below normal for temperatures in that 11 to 15 day period. We're not denying that, okay? I'm just saying this is just not one of those patterns that is just, the best we've ever seen. Here's the concerns in the forecast pattern right now. Okay, the concerns in the pattern overall, all right, is that it's the brief time we're spending in these MJO phases that are colder. A lot of the subseasonal data now coming into really moving the MJO rather quickly through phases 1, 2, and 3. Now, phases 1, 2, and 3 can offer up a stormy and a colder pattern for a time. What we get concerned with is how quick it's there. The Pacific Ocean it cooperates for a time in these phases. But as soon as we see the end of phase 3, the Pacific Ocean really stops cooperating. And with the unfortunate location of the polar vortex and the overall forecasted evolution of it, that is not a good sign if you want January to be cold. You can get cold for 5 to 10 days, and that might be it in terms of notable cold with big snow systems. These MJO forecast plots are concerning. Now, again, I did mention MJO2, MJO3, those are okay. All right, again, they're not bitter cold patterns. We may have an Arctic blast somewhere around the end of the first week of January or so into the beginning of the second week. There may be a decent blast of cold air for a couple days. As we do get a brief tap into the vortex, and I'll describe that here in just a second. These are your January El Nino positive global wind patterns, and the MJO3 on the left for January, MJO4 on the right for January. And these are both really, there's a high number of days for these analogs. These are high confidence analogs. These aren't, just a couple of dates and we throw them together. There's a lot of dates in these. So, it's not out of the question here that after, January, let's call it 15th for, we're throwing darts right now, after that time frame, that it doesn't get really, really warm. In fact, that's a growing concern when we look at the polar vortex. And here's what I'm talking about with the Pacific Ocean cooperating. Okay, we go into a period momentarily where we do have a negative EPO that develops. Okay, we talked about this last video. We were waiting on this to happen. It's looking like it can. Okay, models are still struggling on the negative Arctic oscillation, on the negative AO, and which would really help dislodge Arctic air down into the lower 48. So we've got one of two here, if you will. Okay, the reason it's so important to see the Pacific Ocean pattern cooperate, to see that EPO, that ridge retrograde, is just due to the overall continued placement of the vortex. When the core, you have to look at the heights in this particular situation when analyzing the PV. This is the PV. It's the center of it right here. Okay, this is the PV. All right, it's not the blues. It's the center of the 10 millibar heights. And so if we want to get really technical, the core of the vortex is right here. It's right in the center here. And in order for that to deliver cold into the lower 48, the core of that has to be over here. It needs to be on the other side of the hemisphere. And or what has to happen is Pacific blocking has to create a block to create a cross-polar flow where the cold air would come from here and flow down into the other side of the other side of the hemisphere. Okay? In this particular instance, the vortex in the 11 to 15 is over here, so the cross-polar flow with the brief negative EPO sets up shop for cold delivery. The problem is that forecast for that EPO is brief, right? That's the problem here. This is the day 10 plot. You see the retrogression of the ridge. Here it is in the Canadian prairies in Canada, and then it retrogrades, and we see brief cooperation in the tropospheric vortex pattern where you can get cold to bleed down in. You can get a supply of cold for a time. We do see that late, into January, late first week into the second week, we see the tropospheric vortex 500 millibar cooperating with that. All right. The concern is this. Both subseasonal models out to January 17th right now, the 5-day window of the 17th, like the 14th to the 17th, the Pacific pattern stops cooperating. It's just done at that point. Okay, and you see we go back to positive EPO, negative PNA on both models. Okay, and we get the ridge back here in the east. And the problem is in this time frame is that the vortex is progged to be on the other side of the hemisphere. So if the Pacific pattern stops cooperating because the MJO has moved back into the warmer phases, the forecast for cold rapidly vanishes. The trend in the last 3 runs of the GEFS weekly suggests the vortex weakening is no longer going to be a thing. In fact, it's trending towards a stronger than average vortex by mid-January. This being the case, the only way we're going to get cold again late January into February is to have another trip around the MJO. Not out of the question. I think it can happen. I think we can get cold again in February for a time. But sustained, prolonged pattern changes with endless amounts of snow and cold air right now just do not seem likely based on the analysis I just gave you. Okay. Snowfall over the next basically 35 days. Here's what it looks like. Again, you can see, there's some avoidance there in the coastal regions, the East Coast, the Southeast, and the Midwest. The Mid-Atlantic, interior, Northeast, and New England could possibly see their fair share of snow, but I've seen these maps a lot snowier. Okay. With that said, the end of the month, into the early January, it doesn't mean it can't snow. Doesn't mean it can't snow. We actually have the period progged for some above normal activity in the mid-Atlantic and into the interior north and east. All right, pending exact track of the low, maybe you get a coastal snow. It's not a pattern for snow in the Midwest and the Ohio Valley yet. It's something along the deep south up and into the mid-Atlantic and the interior northeast in this time period. Maybe into the second week of January, it can migrate back into the Midwest or the Northeast where you have a transfer situation. Overall outlook for January, given everything I just said, okay, we continue to run cooler down here because it's going to be wetter. It's not Arctic air. I mean, again, we averaged 924 HDD units in January. We're forecasting 885. It's even below normal heating demand. And so we're not forecasting a very cold month. We're forecasting perhaps average temperatures in the mid-Atlantic and some of the Northeast. Okay, and there can be in January a big storm or two. We have above normal precip favored here and equal chances for temperatures. But as of right now, we do not have just a gangbusters pattern for winter with a ton of Arctic cold and snow. So those are the risks. If the vortex doesn't play along and the Pacific is only favorable for 5 to 10 days, then it's odds are mid to late January can get very warm again relative to normal. So we will keep you posted. If you got questions, holler at us. If you want to hate on us, tweet us something mean, whatever. We're all for it. We're here for it. It's fun. So you guys have a great day. Merry Christmas to you. Talk to you soon.